يشهد النظام الدولي مرحلة إعادة تعريف قواعد القوة والتوازن في العالم. قرارات سياسية مفصلية، صراعات دولية ممتدة، توترات إقليمية متصاعدة، وتنافس استراتيجي متزايد بين القوى الكبرى. في هذا السياق تبرز الحاجة إلى قراءة تحليلية تتجاوز العناوين وتبحث في المسارات العميقة لهذه المتغيرات. فكيف نفهم ما يحدث اليوم؟ وما مستقبل النظام الدولي والمؤسسات العالمية في ظل الاستقطاب الحالي؟
Your Excellency, distinguished guests, colleagues, and audience, it is a pleasure to welcome you to today's session titled The International Order, Current Moment and Future Trends. This is Dr. Fatma Al-Karbi, American Affairs Researcher at ECSSR, and I will be moderating this session. Dear guests, as we enter 2026, international order is undergoing profound and unexpected shifts. Prolonged wars are becoming normalized, collective enforcement mechanisms are weakening, and the spheres of influence are re-emerging. These developments raise critical questions about the future of the international system, fueling debates among scholars, concern within business and investment communities, and doubts about the effectiveness of traditional diplomacy in navigating today's ambiguous global landscape. To help us better understand these evolving dynamics, we are honored to welcome His Excellency, Professor Yrimietx, who has played a vital role in international affairs as first President of the United Nations General Assembly, as well as Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for coming here, and it's an honor to have you with us today at ECSSR. Let me first open this session by asking about the current state of world politics. Having observed the international system from inside the United Nations, how would you describe the current state of international order in one sentence? Are we in transition, fragmentation, or something more structural? Where are we as a collective international community are headed?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. I'm very grateful to the leadership of the center and to my dear hosts in the UAE for giving me this opportunity, and not just for myself, but also to my dear students from the NYU, who I have had the privilege of teaching for the past 2 weeks, teaching them about geopolitical affairs and about where the world is going. So actually, what you're asking me as a first question is actually the theme of my class at the NYU. Since you asked me to be very succinct, which is not easy, given everything that is going on, I'd say that structurally speaking, we as the world, we are going through a phase which I call geopolitical recession. Mm-hmm. When you say recession, you instantaneously start thinking about economic cycles. Because in economic cycles, you know, the positive cycles are followed by negative, and they're very well known, quantified, understood. You know that 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth constitute a recession, after which there is a bounce back and so on. Well, my hypothesis is that geopolitics is also cyclical. Mm-hmm. That there are good periods followed by bad periods. But the cycles in geopolitics tend to be much longer than the cycles in economy. In economics, we're talking about 2 to 3 years. In geopolitics, we are usually talking about decades. Mm-hmm. Again, it is not easy to understand when they start and what triggers them, but you know a recession when you see it. I think that by most counts, one can argue that the current state of affairs in the world, and in particular between the key powers, mm-hmm. is a recessionary cycle. In recessions, there is very little trust and very little cooperation. There is much transactionalism and zero-sum understanding of the world affairs. Nations, and especially big nations, they tend not to work together. They tend not to agree on multilateral treaties. And
Here we're talking big nations, like
in
great
particular,
powers.
in particular, the big powers, because in recessionary cycles, everyone is on his own and for himself, first and foremost. Maybe one country triggers, or a particular development triggers a recessionary cycle. But once you're deep in a recession, then everybody prioritizes its own national interest very strongly. You are a researcher of America, so America First is something that I'm sure you have spent a lot of time analyzing. Sure. What it means and what it, where it's heading and so on and so forth. It's not just America First. Many actors in the world today are in a position that they prioritize their own national interests much more acutely than, let's say, 10 years ago, when we were in a positive cycle of geopolitics, so that we could agree on a Paris Climate Treaty, that we could agree on sustainable development goals, although there were difficult things to negotiate. I personally participated in this at the inception. So right now we are talking about recession in geopolitics, in international affairs. It is going to stay with us for a while. And the trends are such that the recessionary cycles seem to be spinning down, actually going deeper into the negative territory.
Mm-hmm. Okay, since you mentioned and talked about America First and these internal prioritizing the national interest of each state, I want to mention and talk about the manifestation of that tariff war between the big powers, namely China and US. How do you assess the trajectory of US-China competition? Are we in a new Cold War era, or a fundamentally different type of rivalry?
I'm a big fan of Henry Kissinger's scholarship of China and his attitude to China, and the ways that he dissected, understood, and worked with Chinese leadership for about 5 decades. I mean, he's no longer with us, Henry Kissinger, but until recently, he was, I'd say, the most prominent non-Chinese scholar on issues related to China. And I remember when I saw him last, and that was 5 years ago, he said in a very beautiful setting, not as beautiful as this one, but very beautiful. Mm-hmm. He said, he was asked whether we were heading to a Cold War between the US and China, and he said, we are in mm-hmm. the Cold War. And that was 5 years ago. That was 5 years ago, so things have not improved since. Mm-hmm. The tariffs that you mentioned and other developments are certainly not an improvement to the situation of 5 years ago. But the tariffs and the opening salvo of the new American, or the old American, Trump 2.0 mm-hmm. administrations towards China were met by a very firm resistance mm-hmm. and a very firm pushback by China, mm-hmm. to the extent that was probably not anticipated in America. Mm-hmm. So that a very tough ball that was sent from Washington was met with an even tougher ball. Okay, you talk about tariffs, we talk about the complete closure of export of rare earths and critical minerals, which is going to stop your economy, which is going to stop our economy, which is going to cause a global economic crisis. So deal with it if you would like to uphold this tariff threat. And it took about 2 weeks for American administration to take a step back mm-hmm. and to say, okay, let's negotiate. I personally think that the trajectory of the US-China relationship is going to be stable mm-hmm. over the next year to 2 years. But declining. It's not going to be a precipitation that most people expected. This is because China demonstrated that it is ready for an escalation in a way that America was not, that there are going to be strategic trends towards decoupling, and especially when it comes to the tech sector, they're going to be most prominent in the tech sector, but I do not expect a dramatic fallout between the two most critical superpowers of the day, unless a black swan situation occurs. And what could be a black swan? I don't know, because if I knew, it would not have been a black swan. By construction, the black swan is something that you cannot anticipate. But in a highly charged voltage situations, a black swan, which occurs from time to time, could trigger a very significant precipitory downward spiral. I am not suggesting it will happen. I think it is more likely that it won't. But in order to end in a good place, the US-China relationship, it would require a change in trajectory that is currently not happening.
But what is this good place in this
To end in a good
nature
place,
of relations?
ending in a good place, meaning like we're not going to be worried about whether or not there's going to be a third world war in a month from now. Ending in a good place means that it is not only parts of the world that can, enjoys, that can enjoy the economic growth and increased prosperity, but it kind of spreads to all corners of the world. The last time we had this kind of economic situation was almost 10 years ago. And then a series of things happened. Some political events in the West that brought about governments that decided to shake the boat, political developments in referenda around the world. COVID happened. There were several challenges in the meantime. But going back to the path of growth and prosperity, not just for few, but for everybody, would require a shift in the US-China relationship, which at this moment, I find it very, very difficult to foresee.
Okay, where does Russia fit in this emerging order? How do you evaluate its current role? Is it trending towards becoming a regional power, or will it maintain a status as a great power? What kind of role? Will it play, or can it play a positive role to go and reach that good place you just talked about?
Just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, we had a great lecture on Russia in which I tried to share with my students the little that I know about Russia, but I was also joined by Zoom with a brilliant intellectual from Moscow, the head of the Moscow School of International Relations, very, very impressive guy who reminded us that one of the repeating fatal mistakes was to write Russia off at certain points in time. I think that Russia is not going to go away as a big power. I think that by construction, a force that has the capacity to erase the life on Earth, which is a nuclear power, is by construction not regional, it's global. If you have the capacity to destroy the world, you're not a regional power, you are a world power. And you got to be treated with respect and consideration that is due to such influential actors. This war in Ukraine is, I'd say, one of the fundamental developments of this decade. But the war in Ukraine is not the reason why the geopolitical recession is now with us. The war in Ukraine is the result of the geopolitical recession. The war in Ukraine was very, very easy to be foreseen. And the writings were on the wall. And a lot of people were screaming, this is going to be a war. Stop doing what you're doing. But unfortunately, open-eyed, we sleepwalked as a world in this conflict, which has shaken profoundly certain parts of the world, and Europe in particular. I think that as a result of this war, there are going to be some big problems in the continent where I come from, in Europe. The energy situation has gone upside down. The strategic investments in economy are going, in my opinion, in the wrong direction. I'm referring to increased defense spending at a time when there are so many other crucial aspects to be addressed of European societies and economies. And I am worried because Russia right now is a very successful war economy. I'm not going to talk about what happens militarily. I personally believe that there's only one way that this war can end. And it was obvious from the beginning how it would end. I feel very sad that it is probably going to take more time and more tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people to die before the war comes to an inevitable end. But I'm talking about the economy. Russia survived sanctions by turning itself into a war economy. It spends now 6% of its GDP on defense. What's currently happening in Europe is that Europe makes pledges to ramp up defense spending to the level of 5%, which is, by the way, a much bigger total number than the Russia 6%, because the European economy is much bigger. Now, if it really happens, if de facto Europe sets up a war economy, then two war economies next to each other with catastrophic political relation, I mean, tell me what can go wrong? A war can happen between the two war economies that have difficult political relations. I am very worried that even if there is going to be a truce and hopefully peace in Ukraine in 2026, that the long-term trend of Russia-Europe relationship is going to be poisoned, and that it will keep influencing the global affairs to the extent that the prolongation of the geopolitical recession is going to occur. So not just that the negative US-China trend is a big contributor to the recession, a very negative EU-Russia trend is a big contributor to the geopolitical recession. And I'm afraid that we are not moving in a good direction on that front either. But to come back to the very beginning, and this is the last thing that I'm going to say, Russia is a global power. Russia is not a regional power, and wishing Russia away has been a frequently repeated mistake by many generations of leaders around the world over the past centuries.
Do you think that Europeans understand that? What has to be done here? Because you mentioned...
I don't think that the Europeans understand. When you say the Europeans, I mean the European political leaders.
Yeah, of course.
The vast majority of them, they do not come across as understanding too well what I tried. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are right. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'm listening day after day to the European leaders. And by the way, I work in Paris. I teach at the Paris School of International Affairs. I'm in France most of the time in the second half of the year. And I keep hearing this, we cannot talk to the Russians. We must not talk to the Russians. So what are you going to do with the Russians if you're not going to talk with them? Are you going to fight a war with them? I wholeheartedly advise you not to fight a war with Russia, because fighting a war with Russia that Russia would see as its existential threat is going to end up very bad for everybody. And I have a young daughter, and I don't want this to happen. The European Union keeps doubling down on this anti-Russian rhetoric, which which I understand where it comes from, and not even going to say that there are no elements of legitimacy to their sentiment towards Russia. But in reality, it is just bringing us to a situation where we're continuously going to be on the cusp. And when it comes to Europe, it is going to assure that there can be no bouncing back of the European economy for a very long time. One of the key reasons why the European economy is in trouble is that all of a sudden it stopped being able to power its industry with the Russian gas. So you stop buying Russian gas and you start buying energy elsewhere at 3 times the price. And then you are then you're nervous that the Chinese are more competitive than you are. Of course they are. It's not just that the technological superiority in certain areas of Chinese are bringing this about. It's also the fact that the Chinese can power their industry in a much cheaper way. How are you going to solve it? You're going to solve it by buying American gas? Well, good luck making a good deal with Donald Trump. He's a difficult person to make a good deal with. I mean, good deal for him, but good deal for you is, unless you're China, it's tricky.
I see. Okay, since you mentioned war in Ukraine, and you said that it's a result of this geoeconomic or political recession. What is your perspective on the continuation of this crisis? Will it end anytime soon? If so, how and when?
I think it's a 50-50 that it ends, in my opinion, in 2026. I very much hope that it does, for the reasons that I already mentioned. In the end of the day, the crisis is going to finish, that this war is going to finish by the division of Ukraine.
By the division of Ukraine?
I mean, Ukraine is already divided because about 20% of Ukraine is controlled by Russian troops, which are very, very unlikely to withdraw or to be forced to withdraw, despite any military measures that you might undertake against them. I actually hope that no significant military measures are undertaken against the Russian troops to the point that they have to start withdrawing, because then we are entering a territory of a nuclear option that
nobody wants.
Yeah. Right? So Ukraine is going to be divided, whether at the place where there is a current front line, or, in my opinion, more likely, at the borders declared by Russia after annexation of the 4. And if I were in Ukraine's shoes, I would take it. Because if this goes on, the line of division may be further to the west. When this war started, I mean, it did not start in 2022. The conflict started much earlier. But when this last phase of conflict started in 2022, very early after the beginning of the special military operation, the way the Russians call it, or invasion, the way that the rest of us in the world call it rightfully, there was an attempt to strike a deal to stop it, to make a very urgent ceasefire, and it was done with the help of Turkey. Turkey was a mediator, and there was like rounds of meetings in Istanbul that ended up in a deal acceptable to both parties. The Ukrainian side signed off to this, and the Russian side signed off to this. And it was actually the last moment intervention by the Western powers personified in Boris Johnson's trip to Kiev to tell them, no, don't do that. We are going to support you. Just keep fighting this war. The deal that was not signed but agreed did not envisage the 4 regions to be part of Russia. At that time, what was on the table was something else. Just the Crimea, but not the 4 regions. Now, what I think is on the table is the 4 regions. In 6 months from now, if we don't have peace, it may be more. That is my reading, and I could be seriously wrong, of course.
Okay, what is the role of middle powers in this context of
Where is, sorry?
the role of middle powers in this context of geopolitical recession? Are they becoming, or can they be, system shapers, or will they stay system navigators? Since world powers now manifested in EU do not want to understand the strength of the Russian and talk to the Russians.
It is inherently very dangerous time for, it's never a good time to be small and weak. But under the current circumstances, it's exceptionally dangerous to be small and weak. And maybe you can invite Danish foreign minister to talk to you about this sentiment, and especially after the meetings that were taking place in Washington yesterday. But I think that small countries, it is in small countries' interest that international organizations and institutions, regardless of how slow and paralyzed they come across, and they come across as slow and paralyzed in geopolitical recession by construction, because the big powers that have the biggest sway in those organizations, they are at odds with each other. But we still have international organizations. We still have UN and other organizations. I think it is in the interest of small and medium players to continue engaging in those fora. Not necessarily global fora, but because the global fora like the UN is paralyzed, then you might want to do more through regional cooperation in your own neighborhood, or like your regions cooperating with other regions. And here, of course, is the GCC, which is the main regional organizations. And I'm sure that GCC is going to rise in significance and prominence. I'm talking beyond the current locomotions. I'm thinking strategically. GCC is going to be an important fora, and the African Union is going to be an important fora, and BRICS is going to be an important fora, and the EU for the European countries is going to be important fora, because when global institutions and global rules are stuck, you still have to cooperate, and you are going to find it easier to do it in regional sub-global organizations, and I expect that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be the era of, the golden era of not multilateralism, but it will be the golden era of minilateralism, cooperating in smaller formats, ideally with the understanding of the global picture.
I want to move this conversation to the Western Hemisphere. With the revival of Monroe Doctrine and the US security strategy and the rise of the hemispheric affairs, where does this leave NATO? Do you think there is a shift in American circles that the alliance is more of a burden than an asset? Or is it just merely a media hype? What's the future is holding?
Look, I think that one of the most important things happening right now in the world is the domestic developments in America. And some of my friends and colleagues go as far out to say that what America is currently witnessing is an attempt at a political revolution. That we are talking about a revolution in America, change of how system works, change of some of the checks and balances, much more, strengthening, significant strengthening of the executive power, and perhaps most importantly, the change of guard when it comes to key economic and financial actors, big companies and the like. I think that if that's true, if you agree that there is going to be, there is a revolution in America, by the way, not necessarily every revolution succeeds. Mm-hmm. Many more revolutions do not succeed than the ones who succeed. But if it is successful, I think it is one of the most significant developments of our lifetime. In my opinion, there were only 3 revolutions in our lifetime that truly mattered globally. The first one was in the USSR by Mr. Gorbachev. It was an attempt at a revolution, both political and economic. It failed. And then the second but the whole world felt the result, because the breakup of the Soviet Union brought about change in the world. The second revolution was the Chinese economic, not political, but economic revolution, started off by Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s. That is a revolution that succeeded. And as a result of this revolution, so many things changed in the world. I think this is the third one in our lifetime and in that category, that if it succeeds, it is going to very profoundly shape history of the future, if you will, when it comes to geopolitics. In the very first place, when it comes to its foreign policy repercussions, is going to be in the hemisphere. Because what happened in Venezuela is not the last it's not the last piece of action that we're going to have in the hemisphere. Quite possibly not even, as early as this year. There'll be further action in the hemisphere, not necessarily of the same sort. It was very, I would say, it was very unique what happened in Caracas. But I am pretty sure that Cuba is going to come to world's headlines sooner rather than later. How it's going to be, what exactly is going to be happening, and what will be the outcome of all these headline-making developments in Cuba is another matter. But there will be, this was not a one-off. There'll be more actions to come.
But is Donald Trump here, President Donald Trump, is he a factor?
He's a very big factor.
Or
I
as a
personally
result,
think he's a big factor.
Or is he a result of this direction towards America first and the grievances that
No, I don't think that Trump is the cause. I think that the Trump is a symptom. Sorry, I don't think that Trump
is a result.
Trump is a result. Trump is a result of this, and is a very, I would say, unique person, unique politician, personality. There's so many things that, no matter whether you like or dislike Trump, or you believe that this is good or bad, what he is doing, it is hard to argue against the fact that he's a fascinating character. Winning the first election and then going very, very deep down and then making its way back, comeback. And the way that he's changing the rules, the way he is acting, is something that a lot of people believe, oh, only him can do this, and let's wait him out, that this is going to be just 3 years, and 3 more years, well, let's survive. You know, hide under the table, don't pick up the call. I mean, just try not to be in his sight, right? And things are going to go back to normal after Trump is gone from office. Maybe. But then again, maybe not, because if this political revolution is successful, I think that we are talking about different ways of America's engaging with the world, which are not seen as idiosyncratic and Trumpian, and only him can say this or do that. There could be a continuity in this direction. I personally believe that the likelihood of continuity of such attitude in world affairs is higher than 50%. It's more likely than not that this thing is going to stay with us.
But is this revolution has already started?
Started.
We're already in the middle of the revolution.
It started. I mean, it's hard to argue against this being a revolution when the executive power issues all these tariffs and unilaterally imposes all these tariffs. And by the way, according to the American Constitution, it is not the prerogative of the executive to set up tariffs. It's actually prerogative of the Congress.
Yeah.
So the subpoena was served to the chairman of the Fed. I mean, there is an FBI investigation into the chairman of the Fed. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe the Fed needs change. Maybe America needs shakeup. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's the way to deal with it. This is certainly something that the vast parts of the American public and voters are supporting. So maybe they're right. Maybe it's very weird and strange that it's happening because American system and American policies were different, and American politics was different until now. But it is so different from what we've had until now that, you know, those people who call it an attempted revolution, they're not crazy when they say that.
Okay, in the context, we're still in the context of this hemispheric affairs. What's your assessment of the competition between the great powers in the Arctic? Will Russia and China truly be able to compete in that domain against the Americans? Take Donald Trump here as a president.
I mean, the biggest power in the Arctic is Russia.
Okay, Russia.
I mean, the guys with the longest, you know, coast that is adjacent to the Arctic, and the guys who are present there was Russia, right?
But we're not seeing anything from the Russian when it comes to Trump policy towards Greenland so far.
If I were Russia, I would sit back and enjoy what's happening in Greenland.
Yeah.
I mean, if Russia feels neuralgic about NATO, and it obviously does feel neuralgic towards NATO and its expansion, to the extent that it launched military action in Ukraine with the explicit aim of stopping the expansion of NATO, it means that Russia sees NATO as a threat. I cannot think of a better way to weaken and relativize NATO and the future of the alliance than, you know, what is happening over Greenland. Greenland, by the way, if you look at the map, it is geographically much closer to the United States, and this is not the international legal basis for claiming that part of the territory. But like, if you Russia, I mean, it's certainly not a Russian part of the territory, and from the Russian perspective, it doesn't really matter if it's controlled by
America.
Controlled, not controlled. It's not controlled by Denmark even today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like administered by Denmark. It's not really a big deal whether it's administered by Denmark or administered by the United States. And this fight between Denmark and the United States, not just Denmark, but the whole of the European NATO contingent and the United States is nothing but a music for Russia's ears. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of days ago, there was an Arctic conference in Russia, and President Putin spoke there, and he showed great degree of understanding and, you know, saying, yeah, I understand why America is doing this. It makes sense. I mean, we're not supporting it, but it makes sense. I think it was one of those beautiful Putin moments in which he says something that is eminently cynical, but with a very straight face and a very good arguments.
Okay, so you mentioned Venezuela, and we're still talking about Greenland. Will this like the Trump action in Venezuela, and you say it's not going to be the last, we're going to see more actions in the Western Hemisphere. Will this erosion in international norms set an example for middle power states, especially in the region? I'm talking the Middle East, in the light of recent events. Or would it be only exclusive to great powers?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, things of that sort, which are, in my opinion, by no stretch explicable under international law. I was, again, talking to my students. International law envisages prohibition of the use of force in international relations, except in 3 situations. One is when the government of a country invites you to help them with, stabilizing a certain situation within its boundaries. The second one is when the Security Council of the United Nations mandates the use of force. And the third one is in direct defense against an armed attack by a third party. I don't think that anything that happened in the U.S.-Venezuela or regional relationship can be, one of those 3 categories. Thereby, it is a violation of international law. So, international law violation is not only constrained to big powers. And since you were talking about the region, there is at least one country here in the region that violates international law on a pretty regular basis, and that will continue doing so, perhaps even more boldly as a result of this current development in America. So when there is a geopolitical recession, and when international organizations are not functioning well, what is it that you're going to do under the circumstances? How do you go about the situation when international organizations, which should be the preferential place to resolve international both disputes and other things, what do you do when the situation is such? The first thing you do is to reform international organizations so that they better reflect the realities and that they better address the challenges of humanity, small and big alike, countries alike. Number 2, as I said before, you're going to do much more cooperation in regional organizations because the global ones don't function well. And number 3, you take things into your own hands and do alone what you must. In other words, act unilaterally. This is the least preferential option, if you ask me. But I think in the future years, in the years that are ahead of us, you're going to see the linear combination of 3. There'll be attempt at reform of international organizations with limited success. There's going to be much more work done in regional organizations, and there will be more and more, I fear, unilateral action being taken by big guys and not so big guys alike.
Still in the Middle East, the protests in Iran. This is definitely not the first time that the Islamic Republic witnesses upheavals. In your opinion, is there anything different this time? And what scenarios do you anticipate, especially with Trump supporting the protests?
I mean, things are different in a sense that Iran's economy is in a dramatically worse shape than before. Things are different that Iran's empire, quote unquote, or the crescent or axis, whichever way you want to call it, is in a much weaker shape than it was until now. Things are different in a sense that you have a much more aggressive adversary of Iran ready to undertake action, and I don't mean only the United States in this regard. And those are the things that are different. And maybe the numbers are different. They say that the numbers are bigger of the people protesting. The thing that are not different is that there is a very, very powerful security apparatus that is ready, obviously ready to use force to the fullest in defense of its position. That is not different. A thing that is not different also is that this time you also do not have a very clear structure and a very clear idea as to what might come if the regime in Tehran falls. What is it that can replace the regime? People talk about the Shah, people talk about others. I'm not an Iran expert, but I talk often to people who know much more about Iran than I do, and they are not convinced that there is for the time being, anything visible and tangible that can replace the regime. And usually, when you have an attempt at revolution that is aimed at overthrowing a certain regime or government, it almost never happens before an alternative becomes clear. Very, very rarely, if ever, you can have a successful revolution without someone leading it who can be the leader of the next chapter. That I don't see in Iran. And therefore, I'm not sure that we are talking about imminent change taking place in Iran. To make a comparison with the bigger picture, if the year 1989 was the year when the Soviet empire collapsed, you know, Berlin Wall fell, changes of government in Czechoslovakia, Poland, like the satellite states of the Soviet Union fell, satellite regimes fell, it was not the end of the Soviet Union. The end of the Soviet Union came in 1991. So if you make a comparison with Iran, they are going through the 1989 moment. The satellite elements are falling, but they are not yet in their 1991 when the regime itself will fall. Or maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, I'll move to the role of UN. Given your experience as a former president of the General Assembly, what role should the UN play in this changing dynamic?
I think and I'm not going to be liked by everybody, especially not in the UN, for saying this. I think that the role of the UN needs to be diminished. It needs to be brought down.
That's a really bold statement.
I mean, in 2016, when I ran for Secretary General of the United Nations, I was the guy running for Secretary General. I was actually the guy who lost in the final to Mr. Guterres. There were 6 rounds of voting. I lost to Mr. Guterres. It was an election in which I promised to change everything, and he promised to change nothing. I came up with a document, the 53 things that I believe must be changed in the UN so that the UN can have a bright future. It was fair. He won. He promised to change nothing. He kept his word. He changed nothing in the UN. But the time to change, the time to reform an organization is during a good era. The time to fix your roof, if your roof starts leaking, is when it's a sunny weather. You cannot fix your roof in the middle of the outpour of rain. You cannot reform the UN during a geopolitical recession, because reform of the UN requires agreement of the countries that are not seeing eye to eye, that are seeing everything in a zero-sum way. You cannot see the big powers now agreeing on the change of the UN. The time was in 2016. Now it's not the time. Now it's time to do a better expectation management of what the UN can do under the circumstances, so that people don't continue being disappointed by the UN. You gotta call a spade a spade. Guys, we're not gonna be able to solve the US-China problem. We are not going to be able to tell America not to intervene in the hemisphere. We cannot tell Mr. Putin to withdraw from Ukraine. There are certain things that the UN cannot do. There are elements of important international cooperation, especially important for smaller countries, that the UN can and should do. But it should focus on this in order to preserve this important framework and structure that I think is going to have a good time again. But the UN is not going to bring about the good time. The big powers will have to deal with each other in a way that at some point they move out of the recessionary cycle. And I hope it's not going to take a world war for everybody to realize, oh my God, we shouldn't be doing this anymore.
Okay, since you talked about World War, I want to ask about the future. If we fast forward 10 years, what will historians say about the 2020s? The decade of the world where the world fell apart, or the decade where it was rebalanced?
I think that if the historians of the future would want to discuss and strategically put their finger on what changed and when, I think that they're going to be first and foremost pointing their finger to three big developments, most of which were by and large American decisions. First one, and because those decisions were made not in the 2026, they were made earlier at the time when there was a unipolar moment, when America was far more powerful than it is right now in comparison to the others. One was Russia was not involved, Russia was not integrated in the New World Order after the Soviet collapse. Number two, China was. Number three, the way that the economics and politics of globalization was played out in the Western industrialized world gave rise, and it was driven by greed, it was not controlled, and it gave rise to political developments and elections of, I don't know, Donald Trump or Brexit, or tomorrow similar situations might be happening elsewhere in Europe. The year when it all came into visibility was not 2026. The year when the geopolitical recession started was 2008, in my opinion. In 2008, you had, if you believe that those three things were crucial, Russia's exclusion, China's inclusion, and greed about globalization, actually, in short few weeks of August of 2008, all three things were playing out. Russia invaded Georgia. So not Ukraine. Ukraine was not the first. I mean, result of the Russian frustration at the expansion of NATO and them not being properly included and consulted. It was Georgia. So Russian invasion of Georgia happened on the same day when you had the opening of the Olympic Games in Beijing, where the whole world realized, oh my God, China is back. And believe it or not, the third thing happened at the same time. The first cracks in the financial books of Lehman Brothers happened during those very same days that caused the global economic, that started the global, it didn't cause, it triggered the global financial and economic recession, out of which the election of various people around the world and various other political developments, first and foremost in the Western world, occurred. So 2008 is when it started. 2026 was perhaps when it became obvious to each and everybody that, oh my God, there's a very different world because these guys are sending helicopters to Caracas to kidnap the president. So that is kind of, and these guys are going to take over Greenland from their allies. Well, these things were in the making for quite a number of years now, in my opinion.
Okay, one last question. You said that there is a mistake, and the Western powers was mistaken by not including Russia. But is this the responsibility of the international system led by Western powers, or is it a mistake from Russia from within for not responding to the changing international and Western values generally?
It's a very good question. And there are different answers to this question. And I'm not taking a value judgment of, you know, whose fault it was. Maybe it was Russia's fault, maybe it was America's fault. I happen to think it was far more of an American fault because my mentor, my thesis mentor at Harvard many, many years ago was Jeffrey Sachs, who was an actor. He was the protagonist of the attempts to reform the Soviet economy in the early 1990s. So he witnessed from near distance. He was, by the way, also the advisor to Poland. So he witnessed from near distance how America reacted to the attempt to embrace Poland and how it reacted to Russia. Maybe it was Russia's fault, but I think by construction, if somebody is a hegemon, and if somebody is by far the most powerful country in the world, perhaps the most powerful country with regard to the rest of the world ever, and we're talking about the United States of America in the 1990s, then it's your responsibility more than other people's responsibility to drive certain outcomes. So I'm not apportioning blame exclusively to the United States or to its leadership or elites, but they are for sure part of the answer as to why it happened.
We hope to see you again at our upcoming events here at ECSSR. Thank you very much for joining and hope to see you again.